The scene had been cleared. The officers had done their sweep. The paramedics had packed up. The incident report had been filed. Everyone agreed. There was nothing left here. Everyone except one. Because when Officer Marcus Webb turned to leave and called his partner to follow, his partner didn't move. Not 1 inch. Zeus, a 6-year-old Dutch Shepherd with one of the most decorated service records in the entire Mecklenburg County Police Department, was standing completely still at the edge of the road, not alerting, not barking, not performing any of the dozens of trained responses that Marcus knew by heart. Just standing, staring at a section of guardrail alongside the highway, a section that had already been examined, documented, and cleared. So why wouldn't he leave? And why? When Marcus finally walked back to where Zeus was standing and crouched down beside him, did the dog turn and look at him with an expression that Marcus would later describe as the most human thing he had ever seen on an animal's face? What Zeus knew in that moment, what his nose and his instincts and his extraordinary animal intelligence had already told him, was something that every trained investigator on that scene had missed. Something that, if it had stayed missed, would have cost someone everything. Keep watching, because what was found in the hours after Zeus refused to walk away didn't just change the outcome of this particular night. It raised questions about a series of events in this county that investigators had quietly filed away as accidents, and Zeus had just blown those files wide open. Now I know what you're thinking. You want to know what was there, what Zeus was detecting that every human on that scene had missed. And I promise you, we're going to get there. But here's the thing about real story. The what only hits you properly when you understand the who, when you understand the people and the dog at the center of it. Because this story isn't just about what was found alongside the highway on a cold February night. It's about how it was found. It's about a partnership between a man and a dog that had been forged across 6 years of shared danger, shared silence, and a level of mutual trust that most humans never find with other humans. And it's about what happens when that trust is tested in the most extreme way possible. But I'll give you this much right now. The scene Marcus and Zeus had been called to that night was a road accident, single vehicle, no other cars involved. A car had gone to the guardrail on the eastbound side of Route 74 at approximately 11:40 p.m. The driver had been transported to Mecklenburg General, alive, injured, stable. The accident scene team had documented the skid marks, the point of impact, the trajectory, standard procedure. Case open, being handled. Nothing that required AK-9 units' continued presence. Nothing that required Zeus to plant his feet and refuse to move for the next 3 hours and 41 minutes. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was what Zeus did after Marcus crouched beside him. He looked at Marcus. Then he looked at the guardrail. Then he looked back at Marcus. And then he sat down, the formal train sit, the one that meant exactly one thing in every scenario, in every certification test, across 6 years of service. I have found something. Right here. Don't leave. Marcus Webb was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, quiet demeanor. The kind of man who filled a room without trying to and said less than he thought. Always. He had grown up in Charlotte, North Carolina, the city that Mecklenburg County wraps around, in a neighborhood that had taught him early that the world was not always safe and that the people paid to make it safer didn't always show up. That memory never left him. When he joined the force at 26, his training supervisor wrote in his evaluation, uncommonly observant, processes before he reacts, will be an asset. By 35, Marcus had worked narcotics, general patrol, and a 2-year stint on the highway and addiction team, which was how he had come to know Route 74 better than almost anyone in the department. He knew that road, every curve, every blind spot, every stretch where the guardrails were older, where the drainage was poor, where the shoulder narrowed. He knew it the way you know a place you've driven in the dark 100 times, which is why, when he arrived at the accident scene that February night, something had felt slightly wrong to him from the very beginning. Not wrong enough to stop everything. Just a texture that didn't fit. He hadn't been able to name it. Zeus named it for him. Zeus was 6 years old. Dutch Shepherd, a breed that looks like a German Shepherd to most people, but operates on a different frequency entirely. Leaner, more intense, wired differently. He had been with Marcus since he was 14 months old, fresh out of Southeastern Law Enforcement K-9 training center in Columbia, South Carolina. His graduating scores were exceptional across every discipline, but his evaluating trainer, a 23-year veteran named Captain Elise Donner, had flagged something in Zeus's file that set him apart from the rest of his training cohort. She wrote, "This dog demonstrates an unusual capacity for what I can only describe as contextual reasoning. He does not merely respond to scent signals. He appears to integrate scent data with environmental and behavioral observation in a way that influences his response pattern. I have not seen this consistently in a dog this young. Recommend extended assessment. Contextual reasoning. In a dog." What that meant in practice was this. Zeus didn't just find things. Zeus understood when something was wrong. Not just the scent of contraband or the presence of accelerant or the chemical markers of human remains. The whole picture. The combination of scent, environment, and something that his trainers and his handler could only gesture toward when they tried to explain it. Something like judgment. Marcus had tested this quality of Zeus's in ways that weren't in any manual. He would sometimes, on quiet patrol shifts, simply walk through a scene without briefing Zeus on anything. Just let him work. And Zeus would orient toward exactly what mattered every time. Not always what was expected. Sometimes toward something that initially seemed irrelevant. But always towards something that turned out to matter enormously. Marcus had learned, over 6 years, to follow that orientation without question, even when he didn't understand it. Especially when he didn't understand it. February 7th, 11:52 p.m. Marcus and Zeus had caught the call as a secondary unit, backup support for the accident scene team on Route 74 eastbound, mile marker 31. When they arrived, the scene was active but winding down. 2 patrol units, an accident reconstruction, paramedics finishing up. The car, a dark blue sedan, had gone through the guardrail at a moderate speed. The impact pattern suggested the driver had attempted a brake, but hadn't been able to correct in time. The driver, a man in his early 40s, had been extracted with non-life-threatening injuries. He had been unresponsive when the first units arrived, but had regained consciousness by the time Marcus got there. He was in the ambulance, getting ready to transport. Marcus did a walk through the scene as standard protocol. Zeus worked beside him, nose down, methodical. The accident reconstruction lead, Sergeant Holloway, walked Marcus through preliminary finding. Skid marks starting approximately 60 feet back from the impact point. Vehicle had drifted right before braking. Guardrail impact consistent with loss of control at highway speed. Looks like a standard single vehicle incident, Holloway said. Could be fatigue, could be a medical event. Driver's not talking much yet. Marcus nodded, looked at the scene. That texture again. That thing he couldn't name. He looked down at Zeus. Zeus was standing still, head slightly raised, not working, listening. Marcus finished his walkthrough, signed off on his presence at the scene, turned toward his vehicle, called Zeus. Zeus didn't come. Marcus turned back. Zeus was standing at the guardrail, the damaged section, looking down at the embankment below the road. Zeus, come. Nothing. Marcus walked back to him. He looked over the guardrail at the embankment, a steep drop of maybe 20 feet into dense brush and a shallow drainage ditch. The accident team's lights were aimed at the road surface. Down the embankment, there was nothing but shadows. Marcus clicked on his flashlight, swept it across the brush below. Nothing obvious. He looked at Zeus. Zeus looked back at him and sat down. Marcus radioed Sergeant Holloway. I've got AK-9 alerted the guardrail. He's indicating the embankment. Holloway walked over, looked down at the brush, looked at Zeus, and made the face that experienced officers make when they're weighing protocol against instinct. Scene's been cleared, Webb. I know. Accident team went over the section. I know that too. Pause. Holloway looked at Zeus again. How reliable is your dog? Marcus answered without hesitation. I've never seen him give a false alert in 6 years. Holloway was quiet for a moment. Then, get a light down there. I'll call it in. 2 officers descended the embankment with flashlights and a portable flood lamp. They worked through the brush slowly, systematically. Marcus stayed at the top with Zeus, who had not moved from his seated position at the guardrail, not shifting, not looking around, just looking straight down at where the officers were searching, guiding them in the only way he could, by the certainty of his stillness. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, and then one of the officers below called up, not loudly, the quiet that comes before a very large statement. Webb, yeah, you need to come down here. At the base of the embankment, partially concealed beneath a collapsed section of brush and debris, was a second vehicle, dark, partially crushed, half buried under the brush as if the vegetation had been slowly swallowing it for some time. Not recent damage. This was not from tonight's accident. Marcus stood at the edge of the discovery area and swept his flashlight across it slowly. The car was older, a different make entirely from the blue sedan above. The front end was destroyed, consistent with a high-speed impact, and had been there for a very long time. Marcus looked up the embankment toward the guardrail. The damaged section above them, the damage from tonight's accident, had broken through a section of railing that appeared on the road surface to have been previously repaired. Patched, not replaced, patched over. And that repair, Marcus could now see clearly, was hiding older impact damage to the guardrail from a vehicle that had gone through it at a different time, a different night, and never been reported. He radioed Holloway immediately. "You're going to want to get the detective division down here." "Why?" Marcus looked at the buried car, at the smashed windshield, at the darkness inside the vehicle that his flashlight couldn't quite fully penetrate from this angle. "Because I don't think tonight's accident is the only accident that happened at this guardrail. Here's something that explains, at least in part, why Zeus detected what he detected. A Dutch Shepherd's olfactory system contains approximately 300 million scent receptors. Humans have around 6 million, but raw numbers don't fully capture the difference. The part of a dog's brain devoted to processing smell is, proportionally, 40 times larger than the equivalent region in the human brain. 40 times. What that means in practice is that Zeus wasn't just smelling the accident scene in front of him. He was smelling the complete history of that piece of road. Every vehicle that had stopped there, every trace of fluid, metal, combustion, every footstep on the shoulder, every event that had ever left a chemical echo in that specific location. And what his nose told him with absolute certainty was that the story of this guardrail didn't begin tonight. It began much earlier, and it had never been properly told. Detective Lieutenant Carla Sims arrived at the scene at 2:17 a.m. She was the kind of investigator who became more focused the later it got, as if exhaustion was a variable that simply didn't apply to her. She descended the embankment with a forensic technician and stood in front of the buried vehicle for a long time without speaking. Then she pulled out a small notebook. When was the last inspection record for this section of guardrail? Nobody immediately knew. She circled the vehicle slowly, noted the vegetation growth pattern, which a forensic botanist would later help date, noted the rust accumulation, the sediment layering, the tire degradation pattern. She looked at the license plate, partially visible, heavily corroded. She took photographs. Then she looked up at Marcus, who was still at the top of the embankment. "Your dog find this?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked at Zeus for a long moment. Then she looked back at the car. "Somebody get me the registration on this plate and pull every accident report filed on this mile marker for the last 10 years. The vehicle registration came back within 40 minutes. The plate was registered to a 2009 model year sedan, reported stolen 14 months ago, but the vehicle itself had clearly been here far longer than 14 months. Sims looked at the report in her hand. Then she looked at the forensic tech. The plate was switched. It wasn't a question. The next 72 hours moved in layers, each layer darker than the one before it. The forensic team completed the excavation of the buried vehicle. Inside the vehicle, they found physical evidence consistent with a high-speed impact, deployed airbags, structural collapse on the driver's side. They also found something that hadn't been visible from outside the vehicle. In the back seat, beneath layers of debris and deterioration, a single shoe, child-sized. Sims pulled the accident report history for Route 74, mile marker 31. Over the last 10 years, she went through them one by one. Most were exactly what they appeared to be. But 18 months ago, there was a report that had been filed and then quietly amended. A hit-and-run incident on Route 74 eastbound. A vehicle matching the general description of the buried car had been seen leaving the scene of a road departure. The initial report had noted possible witness accounts of a second vehicle in the area. The amended report, filed 9 days later by a different officer, characterized the second vehicle as unconfirmed. The case had been marked inactive. No follow-up investigation was documented. The officer who filed the amendment had resigned from the department 4 months after that report was filed. Sims pulled that officer's employment records. She pulled his financial records through the department's legal channels. She pulled the insurance claim that had been filed on the buried vehicle, and she started making calls. At 6:40 a.m. on the third morning, she arrived at the home of a man named Gerald Pratt, 53 years old, former Mecklenburg County officer, currently employed by a private security firm in the northern part of the county. She knocked on the door. He answered it, looked at her badge, and the color left his face so completely that she told her partner afterward. He already knew why I was there. He'd been waiting for someone to knock on that door for 18 months. The full account took 3 days of interviews to assemble. What had happened on Route 74 18 months earlier, what Gerald Pratt had been driving away from when witnesses spotted a second vehicle, was not a simple accident. A car had gone off the road. A family, a mother and her 9-year-old daughter, returning from a weekend visiting relative. The car had gone to the guardrail at mile marker 31 in the early hours of a Sunday morning. There had been a witness to the moments before the accident, a driver who had been traveling in the same direction and who had reported seeing a vehicle driving aggressively close to the family's car before the incident. That witness report had been documented in the initial filing and then quietly buried in the amendment. The mother had survived, injured severely, a long recovery. She had always maintained that another vehicle had been involved. She had been told there was no evidence to support her account. She had been told she was likely disoriented from the impact. She had been told there was no one else on that road. Her daughter had not survived. The shoe in the back seat belonged to a 9-year-old girl named Amara. Sims drove to the mother's address herself. Her name was Denise Okafor. She was 37 years old. She had spent 18 months being told that what she remembered, the headlights too close, the sudden movement of the vehicle beside her, the impact, was a trauma response, not a memory. She had been told to grieve. She had been told to move forward. She had never believed the official account, not for one single day. When Sims sat across from her and told her that an investigation had been opened, that evidence had been recovered, that her account was being taken seriously, Denise didn't say anything for a long time. She looked at her hands. Then she looked at Sims. "How did you find it?" she asked. "After all this time. How?" Sims took a breath. "A dog," she said. Wouldn't leave the scene. Gerald Pratt was arrested and charged 6 weeks later. The former officer who had filed the amended report, who had accepted payment to reclassify the witness account and suppress the investigation, was charged as a co-conspirator. Both cases moved through the justice system slowly, as these cases do, but they moved. Marcus was not in the courtroom for any of it. He was back on patrol, back on Route 74, sometimes, back doing what he had always done. But something had shifted in him quietly after that night. The texture he hadn't been able to name when he first arrived at that scene. He understood it now. It wasn't professional instinct. It was Zeus. Zeus had been reading that scene from the moment they arrived, processing it, building a picture that Marcus's senses, as trained and experienced as they were, simply couldn't access. And when the scene was declared clear and everyone started to leave, Zeus had made a choice. No, not yet. There's more here. Stay. A departmental commendation was issued for Zeus 3 months after the arrest. At the small ceremony held in the department briefing room, the chief read from the commendation document. K-9 Unit Zeus demonstrated exceptional persistence and instinctual detection that directly led to the reopening of an improperly closed investigation, the recovery of critical evidence, and a pursuit of justice for a victim and her family. Marcus accepted the certificate on Zeus's behalf. Zeus sat beside him with the particular stillness that he always had in public settings. Calm, certain, present. After the ceremony, a department photographer asked Marcus to pose with Zeus for the commendation photo. Marcus crouched beside his dog, one hand on Zeus's back. Zeus turned and looked at him. That same look, the one from the guardrail. The most human expression Marcus had ever seen on an animal's face. Marcus looked back at the camera. "He doesn't need a photo," he said quietly. "He just needs to work." Denise Okafor attended the sentencing hearings. She sat in the gallery and listened to every word. At one point during the proceedings, a victim's advocate leaned over and asked if she was all right. Denise nodded. "I just want on the record," she said, "that she was there, that it happened, that someone finally said so. Someone did." A dog named Zeus, standing at a guardrail at midnight in February, refusing to move, refusing to let the truth stay buried in the brush below. I've thought about this story more than almost any other I've covered, not because of the crime, not because of corruption, as damning as that is, but because of the how. Think about the chain of events. A car accident on a Tuesday night. A scene declared clear by experienced professional. Every protocol followed, every checkbox checked, and one dog, standing at a guardrail, saying, in the only way available to him, "You missed something. Don't leave. Not yet." He couldn't file a report. He couldn't write a memo. He couldn't call a detective. All he could do was stand there and trust that the person beside him would notice. And Marcus noticed. Because after 6 years, Marcus had learned the most important thing you can learn from a working dog. When they stop, you stop. When they're certain, you pay attention. When they refuse to leave, you ask why. 18 months. Denise Okafor had been walking around in a world that had officially told her she was wrong, that her memory was unreliable, that her grief was distorting her perception, that there was nothing to find. And beneath a guardrail on Route 74, 45 feet below the road surface, hidden under brush that had slowly been consuming it for over a year, the truth had been sitting there, waiting, patient, immovable, just like Zeus. Because the truth has a property that we don't always give it credit for. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't degrade. It doesn't accept the paperwork that says it doesn't exist. It just waits for whoever is paying enough attention to find it. Sometimes that's a detective. Sometimes that's a journalist. Sometimes that's a family member who refuses to stop asking. And sometimes, it's a 68-pound Dutch Shepherd with amber eyes and a trained sit that means one thing and one thing only. I found it. Right here. Don't you dare walk away. If you've stayed with me through this whole story. First, thank you. Genuinely. These stories take time to tell properly, and they deserve to be told properly. So the fact that you're still here means everything to the reason this channel exists. Now I want to hear from you. What hit you hardest in this one? Was it Zeus refusing to move at that guardrail? Was it Denise spending 18 months being told she was wrong? Was it that shoe in the back seat? Drop a comment below. Tell me which moment stopped you. Because I want to know. And I think the people who watch this channel, people who care about stories like this one, deserve to hear each other's responses. And I have to ask you something. Have you ever had a dog, yours, a friend's, a working dog you encountered, who knew something that no one else did, who fixed on a place, a person, a situation, in a way that turned out to mean something? Tell me about it in the comments. Because I've heard hundreds of these stories from this community, and every single one of them reminds me why these animals are unlike anything else on this earth. If this story moved you, please hit the like button right now. It is the single most powerful thing you can do to keep stories like this one alive on this platform. One tap. That's all it takes. And if you aren't subscribed yet, I want to make you a promise. This channel will never rush us. It will never pad a story. It will never treat you like you have a short attention span. Every story here is told the way it deserves to be told. Subscribe and you'll never miss one. Now, before I let you go, the next story coming to this channel, I'll tell you this much and nothing more. AK-9 tracking unit deployed to locate a missing hiker in the Appalachian backcountry. 3 days into the search, the dog stopped tracking the missing person entirely and started tracking something else. Something that had no missing persons report. Something that had no file. Something that investigators would later say had been carefully arranged to never have a file. That story is coming soon. And if you thought tonight's story was something, I'll just say this. You haven't been tested yet. Subscribe. Stay close. I'll see you then. To Zeus. To every K-9 who has ever refused to leave a scene before the job was truly done. The world is safer because you were paying attention.